let's assume that we're having this discussion now about someone's, come to the point where they realize that they're feeling bad more than they're feeling good. It's not having them feel good at all anymore, and they're ready to quit. Okay, so at that point, what will we do? Well, the worst thing that you can do, it just makes perfect sense to me. The worst thing you could do is go to a program, or spend time in any kind of a program where the focus is purely on the thing you're trying to leave behind. So if you're sitting there just doing, I'm so and so and I'm an addict, and it's just reinforcing you all the time that you're an addict, plus you're hanging out with people that are addicts, you go to drug treatment, and like I've said, I have been exposed in part of it, whether it was myself or a family member or someone involved in a program, or I was on the board of a drug court program. And then my son, well, I went from the the most expensive, exclusive kinds of treatment down to, I mean, I've gone the whole echelon of everything, including alternative treatments, including iboga in Costa Rica. I took him for iboga with shaman and the whole thing for 9 days, and it was a whole big thing, including that. So I mean, really ran the gamut. Ultimately, what it came down to every time is that he could get clean, and he got clean many times, but eventually, the things that were pulling him into using in the first place were still there, and they hadn't gone away. And for any program that I would want to come up with would definitely be focusing a lot less on shaming the addict and making the addict focus on being an addict, and a lot more on finding the passions and finding the core of who the person is, a vibrational universe, and there is this whole big soul existence that's going to go on, and we're in just one small piece of it right here. Basically, things that are wrong with us, ways we've hurt people, how we need to be saved from ourselves, how we need to, it's language that's just all really not the right kind of language for people who already feel pretty bad about themselves. I mean, first of all, my son was someone who was very in touch he was very compassionate and very loving, and so he knew how he wanted to behave. He knew who he wanted to be, and he knew how far from that he was, and he felt way worse about that than anyone else ever could have made him feel. He felt 10 times worse than anybody else did about that, and the way that he saw himself was 100 times worse than anyone else saw him, and so he didn't need that drilled into his head. And I went to a program myself, and I was feeling so bad about myself when I got there. And this boot camp philosophy where it was sort of like, we're gonna, beat you all the way down so we can build you back up again, kind of thing. And they just had no idea how far beaten down I already was, because of course I didn't look it. I mean, I was a survivor. I was a person who had been raised to, put a smile on my face and my lipstick on and go out the door and look like I had it together. But I was just a broken person when I got there. And so, them thinking that they had to knock me down a few pegs, it was just really far off. Really, really far off. And, I really needed to be loved, and I really needed to be nurtured and listened to and cared for, and I think that's what most addicts need. And I think that a large part of why a big majority of them are using is because they're in so much pain, because their world, the people in their life, they don't see enough. They haven't experienced nearly enough of that. Both of my sons and I had the same root problem. We had the same root problem from where the depression and all of that came, and that was the fact that we were surrounded by people that we loved, and surrounded by people that were abusive, that didn't love us back, So my program, if I was designing a program, I know that it would have to have structure because we need structure, we need steps, and so we'd have to come up with some kind of substitution for the steps, but it would all be in much more positive language, and it would all be about having power and being good and being successful, and it would be also not so attached to where I am in my addiction or where I've been in my addiction, but it would be much more focused on where I'm going to go, where I'm going to, who I'm going to be when I'm at my best, who I was before the addiction even, but who I'm intended to be without this addiction problem. That's more what the language would be like. And then I would put in a lot of the tools and techniques that we can use just to help beef us up, like, and I'll do other episodes on some of these things too, like tapping, which is emotional freedom technique, which is where you tap at certain points as you talk through things that are triggering to you. Similar, it was called EMDR, where you deal with traumatic experiences and you hold these little vibrating pallets in your hands, and you watch some light bar go back and forth, and it just sort of rewires the way that your brain is interpreting triggers and the traumatic things that have happened. And so I would say the first thing you would do is really get in touch with who you are, and I'd start at the end. I'd start with who like thinking about when your life is over, and this kind of came to me when I was sitting there at my son's vigil. And I haven't had lots of experience with death. I really haven't. I have had lots of experiences with loss, but most of the people that I've lost are still alive, and which is, I mean, my son's death it's in its own category, all its own, because that's an incredible kind of pain. But before his death, I would have to say that far and away, I would have said that death is the kindest way to lose someone, by far the kindest way to lose someone, because the people in my life that had died were basically my grandparents at this point. It was all it had been, and those relations, they died after loving me and after a long life, and there was nothing bad about it. They, except for actually the worst part about it was that they lived too long. They suffered for too many years at the end. But when they died, it was right that they were gone, and they didn't abandon me. I didn't feel any sense that they abandoned me, or that that they didn't love me, or that they chose to, that they chose not to be with me, or that I wasn't, I failed them in some way. There's none of that. But when someone abandons you, and when they're right there in your life, they're right, like, live in your town, and the only thing that's changed is that they just don't choose to see you anymore. You're just not important enough to them to be with, they're just choosing not to have you in their life. That's a whole other level of pain. And when it's your parents, it's a kind of rejection that is, that goes to the bone. And when it goes on, every time it happens for years. I mean, even still, even with all the work I've done, I mean, it's far better than, but even still, even with all the work I've done, there is a little place where it just, it hurts me, because it just is such a shame, and because I know what it cost us, and what it especially cost my children and me, is that, I know that my son my son is gone because he was born into a family, because he was a sensitive kid who needed a lot of support, and he was born into a family that was an emotionally abusive family, and he couldn't survive it, and he didn't have the support that he needed, to get through it. But I absolutely believe that if he had two loving parents and a loving extended family, that he wouldn't be gone.